Hello, everyone. This is our first episode of Light of the World, coming to you from Jordanville, New York. And today we have with us a very special guest who I'll introduce shortly. But before any introductions start, we're going to say a quick prayer.
Царю Небесный, Утешителю души истины, и же везде сы, и вся исполняя сокровища благих, и жизни подателю приди, и вселися в наичистины от всякие скверны, и спаси блаже души наши.
So, I'm Andre Sliman, a third-year bachelor student here at Jordanville at the Holy Trinity Orthodox Seminary, and we have
John Keller, second-year master student.
And our beloved guest today, the first speaker, is Father Deacon Nicholas Kotar, who is not only our choir director here in Jordanville, he's also a professor of liturgics, music, and he is a renowned author.
Something like that.
Something like that, yeah. So the topic of our conversation today is going to be the beauty of our faith, how we see heaven brought down to earth during the divine services. And the book that we'll be referencing is...
Some light reading, you know.
Some light reading. I don't know if you can see it, but it's on the Ecclesiastical Mystagogy by St. Maximos the Confessor, right there. So our first question, nice meaty one, a big one, almost a paragraph, but I think it's the most important one that we'll be asking today. And it's that in this book, on the Ecclesiastical Mystagogy, St. Maximus describes the church as having the same activity, energia, as God. He says that the church works the same things and in the same way as God does around us, as an image relates to its archetype. In what ways is this most clearly prevalent in our life in the church?
Yeah, I think we've already lost everybody after the first line of that long question. It was like, wow. You know, reading it on a piece of paper beforehand, you're like, yeah, this is great. We're gonna get this in. But first off, how are you guys doing? It's good to see you guys.
We're doing great.
And that was all cover exciting for John to actually show me the questions so I could remember what. Yeah, John, you're so smart. Good job. See, he knows. He understands.
Well, we're excited. This is our first podcast. To my knowledge, Jordanville has not done a seminarian-run podcast before.
I don't think so.
And this will be the last.
So. Oh, no. I think we're off to a good start, and we're talking to someone we really wanted to, you know.
Well, that's very kind. It's very kind. Yeah, we needed to keep it a little bit, casual because this is, of course, extremely... light reading.
It's dense. I remember looking at this.
I think it's for a good book for catechumens to start off with.
Yeah, no catechumens should read this ever.
The old ladies in church.
Oh my God, can you imagine? No, I mean, it's on the one hand, you might think maybe this isn't the best, maybe it's not the best thing to start with because it's so dense, but really so much of what Jordanville does is right here. It's right here. So much of what we talk about in liturgist classes, so much about what the bishop talks about, so much of what happens in the church services. It's all right here. It's all right here. And it all comes. So, okay, I don't want to get too technical and too academic about this. Let's keep it simple, right? So the idea, the same energy as God, right? The same activity, same energy as God. That's important, but let's phrase it properly first.
Sure.
I'm not going to out anybody here, but maybe I should. A fellow professor once in the altar told me, what is the point? He was tired. It was after like 5 days straight of hierarchical liturgies. You all know how that can be.
Yeah.
And he was like, this is what we do here in Jordanville. Yeah, but shouldn't we be doing more, taking care of the poor, the sick? Shouldn't we be out there, ministering to the homeless? Isn't this just wasting time being in church for so many hours and being at the liturgical services? And yeah, they're beautiful. Yeah, they're lovely. This is all we do. Like, is this really what we should be doing? And it's an important question, right? Because it's on everybody's mind. We just finished our entry into Lent. And as we do, one of the preparatory weeks is the week of the final judgment, right? When we remember the parable of the sheep and the goats, in which all you hear about is Christ talking to everybody and saying, "Did you minister to me?" Right, in the person of those who are destitute, those who are poor, those who are sick, those who are in prisons. Right, and it would seem from just a straight up reading of that gospel reading that this is all we need to do. So therefore, there might be some evangelical reason to say that what we do here, meaning 6 hours of morning services during first week of Lent, 2 hours of morning services in the evening of first week of Lent, and definitely not much public ministry because we're in the middle of nowhere.
You're also napping in between.
That's also true.
Yeah.
And who are you going to minister to? The geese? I mean, it's not like there's all that many people here. So it's a question because there was a really unpleasant conversation happening on Facebook right during that time. Also, another friend of mine, who I will not out, suggesting that the obsession with the hymnography's obsession with things like we're going to hell, we're going to hell, we're going to hell, or extend that outwards. Our obsession with the hymnography or our obsession with being in church all the time is beside the point. And we should be more like Christ and we should be more with the people, right? The thing is that shows a very superficial understanding of what it means to be an Orthodox Christian, because it suggests, I think, that a kind of mindset that is actually quite modern and quite progressive in the worst possible sense, in that the implication behind a lot of those things is we can fix this place that we live in, this world. We can make it better. We could, and it's taking it beyond the merely, it's taking it beyond the call of Christ to serve your neighbor. It's more than that. It's more about why are we wasting our time going to church when we could be creating a better world? And behind even that, I think there's this ugly undercurrent of I want to have a comfortable life.
So like a bubble, basically.
Yeah, I want to live in a world that can make things good for me, not just for the
Could you
people.
expand on that part?
Which part?
The I want to live a comfortable life.
Okay, so on the one hand, it would seem like a lot of the people who are calling for a more direct mission for those of us who are out there in the boonies going to church all the time. It might seem on the surface that what we're talking about is something that's evangelical, something that's good, and something that's positive. Because certainly, of course, we have to serve our neighbor. But a lot of times those people are not actually on the front lines of doing the work. They're not on the front lines of being in Indonesia after the latest typhoon. They're not going to Ohio after that big train explosion where a bunch of acid rain started to fall on people. Ohio, yeah. Not Africa somewhere. Ohio.
Right in our home, yeah.
Right? And of course some of them are, but a lot of this is just kind of ideological fencing. And it's more about trying to say something out loud and be heard. Of course, there are people that dedicate their lives to this, and I'm not in any way saying that what they do is not absolutely what they're going to be asked about at the final judgment. But lurking behind all this, I think, is this lack of desire to really inconvenience ourselves in any real way, because it's impossible for most of us to go out and do that kind of work. So it's better to talk about it, and why don't you guys do that to somebody else than actually go and abandon your own comfort and go out and do it. But it's more than that. It's this discomfort with what the church is actually showing us in its services. Because if you're actually paying attention, if you're actually there, if you, like Saint Maximus, engage in the services completely, with the understanding that the hymnography, the space of the church, and everything that happens within it is not simply symbolic in the sense that we like to think about it, as in referencing a reality that we can't see, but actually that reality in some very ineffable and difficult to describe way. It's not just that we're seeing a prototype of something, but it's the actual thing. We cross into a different space that's not entirely material, it's not entirely physical. That's what is going on here. And that's what's really the beauty of what Orthodoxy has to offer in its services. So my answer to, in that very long-winded answer of mine, my answer to my friend in the altar was no. It's very clear from what the saints say, in particular what St. Maximus has to say here, that what we do in church, the worship of God in the church building, is the greatest thing we could be doing, because it is the activity of working towards an actual union between man and God. So in our personal walking into the space and worshiping in the way that we're supposed to, we're actualizing the union of heaven and earth in a way that isn't simply symbolic in the way that we understand it. nowadays in the modern world. Because most of the time when you're talking about symbols, you're talking about the thing that is represented by an image, but the image is not that thing. Right? Does that make sense? Right? So we're talking about this is a symbol for something else. Then the thing that is the symbol is not actually that other thing. Right? It's like a figurative image that represents it.
Like a mask. Almost.
Right, exactly. But that's not what how St. Maximus and the fathers use the word symbol. They actually mean that the symbol and the thing it represents can be one and the same, or like they basically interpenetrate each other. They exist in the same space,
right?
Even if you can't see it. That's why he talks a lot about the difference between, or the presence and the reality of both the physical and the, what's the word he uses? He talks about the visible world and the immaterial world, and both of them are present. We can't see the immaterial world with our physical eyes, but in the church space, we are praying and being and acting, there's that word, activity, energia, with our souls, which are a representation of the church, which is a symbol of God himself. So, in other words, in that space, what's happening, as we engage with the services, as we listen to the extremely ascetic texts, especially something like First Week, as we not simply think about them, but embody them through our activity, as in through singing the words, praying them in our minds and in our souls, and even simply standing in church for all those times, and of course including our body and prostrations and everything, what we're actually doing is we're physically, emotionally, spiritually, in all the layers of our existence, as St. Maximus talks about, putting into action the words of Christ, the kingdom of God is within you. So actually what's happening, if every single human being walked into the church building and prayed the way that we're supposed to, we would bring down it's almost like a violence against heaven, like taking it down and bringing it onto earth. Because this space it's the tipping point between heaven and earth. And you can encounter God in a way there that you can't in any other place. And I guess if I'm going to really get to the heart of the matter, the union of an individual human being with God as possible through the services is salvation. So we can attain salvation by going to church, simply. That's the simple answer. That we can be saved by going to church.
What about those that argue that church isn't necessary? It's just a personal relationship between you and God.
Well,
because obviously, Protestants like to argue that the Catholic Church is corrupt, with the papacy, with the indulgences. So then they basically say that if you have a personal relationship with God and you're saved, quote unquote, then you're good to go.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you have to say?
I've heard many Orthodox people say that too, actually.
And it's creeping in, especially among the youth, because...
Well, what's interesting about that is that there is a certain level of truth about the personal relationship with God and its importance in our spiritual life. Because you can't encounter God outside of the personal encounter, right? You can't have him, that's what the meaning of the kingdom of God is within you. That's what it is. It's not that the encounter with God happens in church, but it happens in you within the church, first and foremost. So it's easy to see, I think, how you can get confused and just stop on the individual part, right? But the issue is that everything that happens in church shows you that the reality is that the individual has to be inseparable from the body, has to be a member of the body, and not a member that's cut off. Because it's not like we go into church and pray with our own prayers. We don't have personal experiences when we're going out into nature and like making prayers up. Although that might be a good thing as well, but that's not how salvation happens. That might be a good personal practice, but unless you have an encounter in the church that's mediated by the actual sacraments, everything is emotional. We're out again, aren't we?
No, we're good.
Okay. So saying this thing about the personal relationship, it's all predicated on emotions. It's all predicated on how I feel right now about my experience of God. But you guys know, you're in Jordanville. You've had the full experience, the full spiritual reality of it. Our emotions don't always reflect the reality of what's going on. And sometimes they lie to us. And sometimes God leaves us. Sometimes he abandons us. Sometimes he leaves us without the warm, comforting presence of his closeness, so that we can work a little bit on the difficulty of spiritual life. Because the whole point of everything that we do is to kill the old man, is to stop being Adam, is to stop repeating the sin of Adam in Eden. And you guys know this. During first week, this happens in an extremely vivid and in a very personally significant way. For me, every single year, there is a point at which I feel like I'm going to die. Like, I'm going to collapse. Like, my body's going to give out. Like, I don't want to move forward. What is the point of doing this? I don't want to do this ever again.
Yeah, day one.
No. You in the past, for me, it's always been day 2.
For me,
on
Tuesday.
It
was day 1 this year for me.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Right after forgiveness, I was good, and then the next day, I start hating certain seminarians, and I'm just getting annoyed.
Yes,
right?
I mean the interpersonal thing that happens immediately. That happens even before Lent. Let's be honest. But like just the kind of the encounter with the heaviness of what it means to be an Orthodox Christian and actually have to do the things that are in front of you, which not many people experience because not many people actually go to the services as we do. Not to say that we're somehow better than or more special than others,
right.
But in the sense, the point I'm trying to make here is that the encounter that we have with the services is really intense, and it really shows you the full possibility of the full extent of what is possible for a single individual human being in the community of the church to accomplish as part of his personal asceticism, which is only possible within the larger group. So it's simultaneously many and simultaneously one. It's simultaneously divided into all the different personalities that we are, but it's also all unified by the single unity of God, which St. Maximus talks about all the time in this thing. He's always talking about how God is one and many at the same time, and how the many of man is effectively removed or made one in the best possible way without erasing the individuality. The many and the one being the way that the Trinity and the unity coexist in each other, right? But he talks about how in the church you have that image, that icon of what it means to be multiple and one. The same way as you see it in the universe, but you see it in a more concentrated way, so much so that you can retain your personality. And yet in that space, in that experience, you feel like you're part of something that is a single entity, a family, a body, and the heart, the head of that body is Christ himself. And you know it, you feel it. And it is in that moment where you're like, I can't do it anymore. That once you force yourself to step past that there's an incredible moment, you all feel it, of, okay, now I know why I'm doing this. Now I know why I live the way we do. Now I know why we have to do all the things that we do in terms of the limitations that we put on ourselves during Lent, but also outside of Lent, why we live with so much constant self-limitation, even outside of Lent as Orthodox Christians, why we don't allow ourselves to, really indulge in too much of anything. It's because of that. It's because through personal experience after walking into that church building and experiencing first week, that it is possible to have an encounter with God that is really intense. And it's right there. It's right in front of you, and you can have it. But to do that, you need to work really hard. Because exactly what Maximus the Confessor says, we are the image that relates to the archetype. And since God is present as Trinity and unity, we can also be present with him as multiplicity and unity also. This is only starting to get to the point of this question. Because it's a really remarkable thing. It's a really remarkable thing to think about, that simply going to church regularly is possibly the greatest thing that a human being can do in some ways. And yet, that's what the Pharisees did, right? And yet, that's what Christians have done throughout many centuries, and it has not brought down heaven on our heads. The physical reality of the world is not any better. The divisions in Orthodoxy in America are not any better. So what's going on?
Well, what's the problem?
Well, I had a priest in Florida talk to me, and it was also during the service. I guess they like talking during the service.
Well, that might be a different topic
maybe
for a different time.
I don't know. But he was telling me, like, again, comparing the Orthodox Church to the Protestant Church, look at what they're doing. They're building their own schools. They're building their own hospitals. They're building their own you name it, they got it, so to speak. And he's like,
Yeah.
what are we doing? He's like, we need to get out there. We like to, I don't know, brag or claim, which is true, that the Orthodox faith is the true faith. But as you were kind of saying, why do we kind of keep it hidden? As Christ said, like under a bushel, a candle under a bushel. We should go out there, just as the apostles did. So my question to you is, you were kind of touching the iceberg, saying that, going to church is the single best thing you can do. But my question is that the only thing that you should be doing?
No, of course
or is
not.
there more?
No, you shouldn't. And I think the answer to the implied question about, look at the Protestants, they have all these social projects, and isn't that doing a lot more good for the world? Isn't that doing a lot more good for the way that people outside of the church encounter Christianity? Isn't that doing something good about the way? That's what it should be. But we see that that's not true. We see that the public perception of Christians right now is probably at its lowest, at the lowest that it's been for a very, very long time. People really don't like Christians.
Oh, it's the most mocked religion.
Yeah. And why? Hypocrisy, because we say one thing and we do another. And so my point here is that actually it's easier, and maybe I'm going to get flagged for this, probably will. It's actually easier to do the thing that my friends were talking about. Much easier to go out and be physically active in the ministration of your fellow man, in the ministry of your fellow man. It is. It's easier to go out and dig people out of the dirt and take care of them and dedicate your life to bandaging up their wounds and things like this. And yes, I'm going to get in trouble for this. It is easier. The problem is, if that is all the hands, right, of the Christian's life. If the hands are active and the heart is absent, you have a robot. You have external benefit, external good things, but they don't have the blessing and the presence and the grace of God in the doing of it. Anybody can be virtuous. You don't have to be Christian to be virtuous in the sense of going out there and helping people.
Right.
You don't. So there has to be something else that's present that makes what we do different. If we truly believe that not simply that we have the true faith, but that what we are doing is transforming the entire world by our actions into the image of God that it needs to be. Not just ourselves, but the world around us. So we are talking about pretty complicated stuff, but my point is this, simply. You need both. If you dedicate your life to the service of your fellow man and your heart remains cold, you are not going to be on the right side with the sheep. That's simply not going to happen.
I think Bishop Luke would agree with you. He once told me during confession, I hope that's okay to say, but he told me that, Andre,
what was the sin that you confessed today?
That's going to remain quiet right now, but I'll tell you what he told me, and it blew my mind. He said that if you go out there, become a billionaire, hypothetically, any one of us, create 50 orphanages and fill them up with kids and schools programs, donate to disaster relief, etc., etc. So you can do all these things, and it won't be even a drop close to acquiring personal salvation and saving your own soul. And it also makes me think of Saint Seraphim's quote,
well, it's not quite that. It's something like acquire the spirit of peace, and thousands around you will be saved. So that's the heart, right? That's the heart of the matter. Why? So Seraphim Swarovski should be the most useless of all saints in the world, right? Because he just went out in the middle of nowhere and communed with bears. Yeah. Totally useless. Like what did he do?
That's pretty cool, though.
I think it's great, but I'm deliberately being silly.
He's every single Orthodox person knows who Saint Seraphim.
Doesn't matter
even
the language.
non-Russians, they know him.
Especially the non-Russians. Same thing with St. John of San Francisco. Of course, he was more active in
America.
Yeah, and he was more active in ministry. But again, with him, it's the same thing. Like even though he collected children from the streets and took them to his orphanage and took his shoes off and gave them to people and did all kinds of things like this, that wasn't the primary mover of his life. It wasn't what started it all. What started it all was the heart, was the personal encounter with Christ that happened through prayer and through the services. All right, so this is what I'm trying to get at here. You need to have both present if you're going to be able to transform the world properly. You can't do it in a way that's going to transform the world around you in a way that is just mind-boggling, like Saint Seraphim, like the early church did. I mean, think about the number of people that were involved that were actual Christians in the Roman Empire. Like, it was a tiny minority. It was hardly anybody, and yet that tiny minority was able to take over the entirety of the largest empire that ever existed. Not because of only social work, although that was a huge aspect of it, but it's because every single individual within that community took it as his personal mission to be saved by a personal encounter with Christ, which can only happen authentically within the liturgical life of the church. Because, and getting back to the question about personal salvation and Protestants and even some of the youth nowadays who don't want to have the life within the church building because they just want to have nice airy-fairy feelings in their heart. You're in there. You're battling yourself in church. Just the act of forcing your attention towards a single point is excruciatingly painful. Especially now.
For seminarians, just the fact of getting up at 6 a.m.
That's bad enough, right? But then constantly forcing your mind and your heart to focus back in on what the church is telling us. And it's there when you're actually paying attention, when you're in church every day, when you're listening and living out in an actual real way the hymnography of the church and the events that are being not simply remembered, but relived in a real way. Remember, this is what St. Maximus is saying, is that it's not just a remembrance, but it's an actual reliving, a recapitulation. When we see Christ on the cross on Holy Friday, we are there with him outside of time in some ineffable way. He says this. He basically, we're going to talk about this later maybe, or we can just skip ahead to one of the questions when the question was about the Trisagion hymn. Before talking about the symbolism of the various parts of the liturgy, St. Maximus talks about it in symbolic terms, right? So this indicates the reality that is heavenly. So we're doing this and we're like pointing towards a reality that's going to be true when after the second coming of Christ, when heaven becomes full. And then he kind of slips into this different way of talking where during the Trisagion he says, no, we're not like the choir of the angels. We are among the choir of the angels. So it's like suddenly in the writing of the symbolism, he is inside the church, imagining himself there, and he realizes, or he knows, being a deeply a person who has a deep personal connection with Christ through a life of asceticism, he knows that actually at that point we are amongst the angels, and the angels are amongst us, and we are singing together the glories of our God. You're not going to get that outside of the church walls unless you've cultivated that within yourself already. So if you're going to be out there and be an image of Christ, and you're going to be the kind of person who saves others by your efforts, which you should do, of course, you should probably either at the same time or before work really hard on the personal sanctity part, which is best acquired through an intensely liturgical life. Because it's all there, it's all in front of you, it's all given to you. The entirety of human experience, from the worst to the best, is presented to you. You live through it through the first week. It's incredible, right? So like you can see it. It's like we're shoved back into the depths of the Old Testament. We're there with Moses at the crossing of the Red Sea. We're constantly being plunged into the words of the Psalms, much of which is just the constant cry of the heart about human betrayal and pain and the worst and most horrible aspects of human existence. But then it moves from that to the glorification of God, to the feeling intense reality inside you that you know that God takes you through all of that by his hand and brings you up and leads you to Jerusalem. And by living through that whole thing, you really start to recognize that this is not just symbolism. It's not just poetry. It's not just figurative language. It is life. It is the most real life that you're going to get. So the more you can do it, the more you can engage in it, the more you're going to start shining with the real presence of God. Of course, you have to be involved in, this isn't just walking in and walking out. It means living a fully sacramental life. Confession, communion, singing on Cletus, all that stuff. These are not small things. These are the heart of the matter. It's the most important thing. Of course, I should say this. I'm the choir conductor, but anyway.
And we're your beloved singers.
Yes, two of them are right here.
Imagine if he said one of them. That would have been something.
Ouch. Which one?
As soon as they get up and leave.
I can follow along with the questions. You're familiar with them, or I can choose one that is your favorite. Up to you.
Surprise him. I see what you do.
Hey, you're the host.
I have one that I like
a
lot. This is my favorite one, and I'm going to skip right to it. In St. Maximus' writings, he did not elaborate much on the significance of the hymns during church, other than that they indicate the vivid pleasure of the divine good things. The big question here is, why is music in church necessary, and in what ways can it draw us closer to Christ?
Yeah. So he doesn't talk a lot about it, but other saints do. St. Basil the Great has a wonderful passage in his commentary in Psalm 1, I think. But the saints are in agreement about music in church. Because we are multifaceted creatures that aren't just a body and aren't just a spirit and aren't just a soul, but all together, you need to have, just as a concession to our fallen state, things that on the one hand draw us up into the higher things, but also give us a taste of the promised blessings, even here, even now. So really, in the middle of a perfectly sung hymn that is really beautiful in the sense that it is sung immaculately, the words come out of the texture of the music so that people can understand it, and the singers themselves are praying that music. You've had moments of this. You guys are in the choir. You know how powerful that is, because at that moment you're not thinking about the text. You're not thinking about the music. You're not thinking about the dynamics. You're not thinking about even what the conductor's going to do, whether or not he's going to throw a book at you for singing the wrong note.
Or punch you in the gut.
That's never happened.
That happened.
Never.
Folks.
No.
I didn't see that happen.
Past Saturday.
No.
But there is something else.
It allows for little windows to open through the material reality, which is the most limited part of what it means to be human. Again, something that St. Maximus talks about all the time. We know as Christians that what we see and what we experience, our sense perceptions, are a very small part of what actually is going on. There's a lot more going on that we can't see, but that the eyes of our soul can see slowly as they are opened, as we draw closer and closer to God. What music does is it's a kind of intermediary on the one hand, because it shows you the possibility of what you can attain by giving you those little moments of beauty. It's also the vehicle by which you can get to that point. So if you can use singing in your own personal sanctity journey, because it's easier to pray when you sing. Psalms are supposed to be sung, not supposed to be read.
What would you say to people that say that actually music distracts you in church? Because I've heard people say, "Oh, it's too flowery, it's too operatic,"
well,
especially Russian church music.
It's the same sort of thing. Like Metropolitan Anthony Bloom was told by one of his priests. This is anecdotal. I don't know how accurate this is, but I think it may be. One of his priests was complaining to him, "The children are running around making noise. They're preventing us from praying." And his answer was, "As soon as you start praying, they'll start bothering you. They'll stop bothering you." I think there's something you can say something similar about church music, and stuff is happening on different levels. So the first answer is, you who are standing in church, you can use. It doesn't matter what kind of music it is. It doesn't matter whether it's Znaimen the chant or the most operatic kind. If you are properly praying, then music will help you, even if it's being screamed by the worst choir. It can. It's very difficult because it can be very distracting, but it can be done. It's still, even if it's worst form, it still can be an aid. It really depends on how much effort you put in. That being said, you should now understand what a responsibility lies on the shoulders of the conductor and the individual singers. Because if you can help the very difficult reality of standing in church for many hours and the entire time focusing all your attention towards God, which is so hard for us to do with our attention being scattered and fragmented in so many different directions, even without the internet, and add that on top of it and smartphones and all that, it's almost impossible. So you can see that if we add to the distractions by singing badly, by singing the wrong notes, by singing the wrong kind of music, that's on us. So yes, there is a huge responsibility for the singer, for the choir conductor, to choose the right kind of singing, to choose the right kind of music, to sing properly. That being said, you can absolutely, I believe is 100%, take the most operatic, distracting, Western European piece of music and you can sing it in a way that will make people pray. You can, absolutely.
Would you argue that church music is not just supplementary, but essential to our prayer?
Yeah. It's not a supplement. It is essential. It's not the most essential thing, but this is how Orthodoxy works. We don't have one thing that is the most important thing, or we don't like the multiplicities of the physical sensory aids that we get. They all work together to unify. Again, getting back to St. Maximus, this is something that we take for granted as people. We look out at the world and we make unified sense of all the things that we see, when actually we shouldn't. There should be no reason why we could look at the collection of atoms that is a tree and make sense of it as a tree. Because what we should be seeing properly is just a bunch of sensory information that isn't being filtered properly, and we shouldn't be able to make sense of it. The fact that we can make order out of the chaos of the sensory impressions that come at us is something that modern science has a very difficult, has great difficulty in explaining. They come up with all kinds of interesting theories about the emergence of consciousness and things like this, but really, it doesn't really make sense how we are able to make so much sense, make so much pattern out of what is really objectively a bunch of noise. It doesn't make any sense. The only way it makes sense is if everything was created by a unity, a God that is one, and a God that unifies everything in him, so that in our being images of him, moving towards the likeness of him, we are able to make unified sense of those things that are around us in ways that help us and help others. So, yes, music as one of the many things that one can encounter as the smells and bells, so to speak, in the church service are absolutely essential, because it is one of those many divided things that in the experience of the individual human being within the church get unified into prayer, into liturgy, into union with God. So you can't do without it. So all these tendencies, unfortunately, amongst modern Protestants, to kind of really pare it down to the bare minimum, to the essentials, get rid of all the singing, get rid of all of the icons, have bare white walls, simplicity. God is simple, let's all be simple. Missing the point. Because God gave us an infinite multiplicity of things. And he also gave us the ability to make sense of those things in a way that unifies. That is something that only God can do. So, because it doesn't make sense. If you look outside of our experience, out into the cosmos, everything out there, it's all a bunch of noise. It only makes sense when humanity takes all of that, gathers it in the image of God, and brings it back up to him and offers it and says, this is what you gave to us, we give it back to you through our voices, through our bodies, through our prayer, through our attention, through ourselves. I know that's complicated, but
it's done at the liturgy.
Yeah.
Thine own of thine own.
Yeah.
So, but just touching on the music part, chapter 11, St. Maximus says, divine hymns move souls toward the clear and blessed love of God, and by arousing them further to the hatred of sin. Could you explain more?
Isn't that interesting though? So to the friend who says, why do we focus so much on the river of fire and images of apocalypse and how we're all going to go to hell? This is the way out. You know the way you become conscious of a desire to stop sinning? It's by an experience of beauty.
Not terror. Beauty.
Not terror, beauty. But so those texts are terrifying, right? But they are presented not simply as texts. They're presented as music. They're presented as harmonious multiplicities put into unity. So you can actually see the image of River of Fire, but it's sung in such a beautifully unified way, assuming that the choir is actually doing what they're supposed to, that you come through it with an experience simultaneously of intense terror and intense compunction. So it's the process of going through beauty that clears your eyes so much that you see I don't want to be sin. I don't want to be division. I don't want to be chaos. I want to be what I feel here. I want to be what I experience here. I want to move towards that reality more and more and more every time I walk into church. I want it to be a constantly growing movement towards God. It happens through the beauty of the music, because music, like nothing else, takes those disparate things. You know it, right? Like so many, like individual human beings with different sounding voices shouldn't be able to blend, right? What I've got a scratchy voice because I've been using it too much. You know, Leo has a big booming voice. Yevgraf has another kind of voice.
It's on your business.
Andres got this low voice, and
John has his voice cracks.
And John's voice cracks at very inopportune moments. And in the most beautiful points of the services, when everybody is really, really focusing in not just on the harmony of the music, but also on the words, incredible things happen. The chord that comes through is not simply beautiful music, but it's prayer. It's prayer that's put into physical form. It's amazing. It really is.
I agree. I wish I could just frame everything you said on a wall and point it at people that come up to me and say, you know, it's just too much. I'm just standing in church and I can't focus. And I'm like, maybe you don't want to focus.
No. It is really hard to focus. It is. It takes a constant effort, like every single second. Yeah, it's hard. But it should be, right? If what we're doing is actually as meaningful as what we're saying, then it should be the most difficult thing you do. It should.
But blaming it on the church music, I think it might be a grave mistake.
Yeah, of course.
Unless it's a really bad choir. But most of the time, we have it kind of held down here. You know?
Look, I mean, we've all had experiences. We've all had services when the choir's done terrible things. Ultimately, it doesn't ruin not just the experience of being in church during that day, but it doesn't really hinder your movement towards God, unless you let it. You know, it's all up to you.
Right.
I don't think God's going to judge you on the quality of your voice.
Yeah, I think maybe.
I hope
the quality of your soul, perhaps,
or your prayer.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of prayer, I had a question that related to the simplicity of prayer. One metaphor that was particularly fascinating in the Mystagogy here was that there was a comparison made of the laity, specifically the clericé, to the angelic hosts through the recitation of the Trisagion during the Divine Liturgy. Yeah. Could you explain what the Trisagion is, and then tell us why we are likened unto the angels when we sing it?
Well, and notice that again, the point is that we're not just likened to the angels, which would be, you know, good enough. If we were like the angels, that's pretty high praise. But it actually goes so far as to say that we sing in the choir of angels when we sing Holy, Holy, Holy. Why? It's because the Trisagion hymn is from the. It's a directly biblical text, right? This is what the angels actually, as far as we know, as far as the Revelation tells us in the prophecy of Isaiah, this is what the angels constantly say to God in His presence. Holy, holy, holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us.
I thought it was the little boy that went up.
That's the story, right?
Is that apocrypha or is that truth?
Do we want to go into is that apocrypha or is that truth? Because that's an entirely different topic.
So I was actually looking up the topic of the Trisagion, and I found this out, and I wanted to bring it to the table. It probably has nothing to do with anything, but the Coptic Orthodox Church and Armenian Apostolic Church believe that the Trisagion originated from Nicodemus. While taking the body of Christ off the cross with Joseph, Nicodemus saw Jesus Christ's eyes open, and then he proceeded to shout, "Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal."
Well, I mean, that's not in the Bible. So I mean, that's a lovely story. It's certainly not,
it's just that's their tradition.
Yeah, I mean, it's not part of the Orthodox tradition. I mean, Andrea, you're talking about the story about the boy being assumed into heaven, and or you were talking about that.
Yeah, because it was like 7th century or so. There's a big earthquake in Constantinople. Yeah. So he got raptured. I'm kidding. He went straight up to heaven, and he heard the angels saying, "Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal."
But the connection there is clear. It's the same sort of experience as Isaiah being taken up into heaven and experiencing the presence of God and the angels praying before God using essentially the same language, right? I think we need to come back at some point and have a conversation about hagiography and truth, and we probably have to have Yevgraf here so that I can yell at him properly.
I'll join him.
Yeah,
I'll yell
because
at him.
because the reality is that the way that we look at the stories that the church gives us that are not directly part of divine revelation,
just like oral, in a sense.
part of them are oral, part of them are written down, but the way that we encounter those, most of us these days, is not the way that the church would have encountered them before. So yes, clearly we prioritize the revelation as revelation because that's what God gave us directly. But we also have a very intense relationship with things that are more apocryphal in the sense that they're more like storytelling. And we don't consider them, we don't put them into like an entirely different book. We don't like relegate them into the attic and say, that's really cute. What a lovely story. No, we look at them, we encounter them, we say, this could have happened. It probably did. Maybe it didn't. It doesn't matter, ultimately, what proof we have historically of whether or not these things happened, because within the experience of the church, we know that the miraculous is constant. We know that God can, as we hear in the words of the great canon, God can, whenever he feels like, what's the word exactly in English? He can...
Jezebel's flunkies.
No.
What is it in Russian?
Set aside the laws of nature.
Okay.
That's a constantly repeated refrain. Not constant, but it's repeated a few times, especially when he's talking about the Mother of God. God, being the Creator, can, whenever he chooses to, bypass the laws that he himself put down, which is miraculous.
We hear this in the services all the time, right?
Right, and we encounter it in our own lives. We just don't see it. We don't pay attention to it. And some of us have more obvious encounters of miraculous kinds than others, but we're going on a bit of a tangent.
Well, you could say every service is a miracle of its sort, in a sense.
Yeah, well, no, it's every service is the highest miracle, because if we believe what the services tell us, what's actually going on is the invocation or the calling down of the divine into a physical space. Mm-hmm. That's what the bishop and the priest are doing. They're calling down. They're literally commanding in a supplicatory fashion.
Right.
But they're commanding God to come down to the thing that is in front of them. That's insane. It's insane to think about. And if you really embrace the reality of it, as the church always has, what else can you say except this is the most important thing that we're doing? It's here. It's right in front of us. And yet how little attention we give it. And how often we think, man, this is a long service and I want to go home. You know?
I agree. Well, some services are definitely much more memorable than others. They're all important. Yeah. They're all tantamount, but some are far more memorable.
Yeah.
So our favorite question, and the one that we want to conclude with today, is, as a deacon in roll corps, which is your favorite service and why? I know it sounds like a 5-year-old asking you this question, but I do mean it. I want to know which one is your favorite. For example, I love Annunciation. It's very chaotic, but I really like it. It moves me to tears, and I can't explain why. But maybe you could explain what your service is, your favorite one is, and why you like it so much.
I don't know. It's hard to pin down a single one. I mean, the stock answer would have to be something like Pascha, of course. But if I'm honest, like I think the most intense, most beautiful, and most personally shattering service of the year for me is Matins of Great and Holy Friday. So the 12 Gospels service. For me, that's a very intense one. Yeah, and it didn't used to be like, but as I was growing up, I didn't like it very much because as a small child, there's a lot of readings. In the parish setting where we were, there wasn't the singing was a little bit on the boring side. Like there wasn't a lot of variety in terms of the melodies. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I did when I became conductor here is knowing the importance of that service and the incredible poignancy of the words, there is constant paradox going on that's crashing against each other. Just the reality of seeing God stretched out on a cross, dying, and yet at the same time, if you look at the icon, it looks like he's holding the cross up, like he's holding up all the cosmos on his back. It just doesn't make any sense. Everything is like crashing into each other. The human mind can't comprehend it, but the human heart can stand there in the presence of this incredible mystery and say, holy, holy, holy. And that's the service that I love the most. And that's the service that I worry about the most as a conductor, because I want as much as possible to help everybody in church go into that experience as much as I can possibly help them to do that. So, yeah. That's a great answer. Thank you. Thank you for being our first guest on our first episode of our first show. I'm very pleased. I think we learned a lot today. Well, John and I definitely did.
I hope that
It's,
our viewers did.
honestly, for a first time, this was probably a little bit too complicated of a topic, but
I think you managed to bring it down to earth.
I hope so.
Yeah.
It really is important. And if you come away with nothing else, just the thought that the thing that we do, going to church, that might seem to be the least important, let's see if we can get to an understanding of why it is actually the most important thing that we can do.
Agreed. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for viewing us and listening to us. And that's it.
All right.
That's all.